welcome back. My name is Rachel.
I'm Jenny.
And I'm Renee.
And we are your hosts for Let's Talk Racism, the show that sends a message to youth about racism and cultural diversity.
As many of you know, racism has been a big issue all around the world. Furthermore, while anxiety and fear about the ongoing pandemic have been widespread, Asian-focused racist incidents and Black Lives Matter protests have been constantly happening throughout the year. Not only was the death of George Floyd and many others heartbreaking, but recently lots of Asian-focused hate crimes have resurfaced at the time we have recorded this.
Our guest today is Xhalida Hazel September. She's a singer-songwriter, micro-medicine maker, as well as founding member of ARC Vancouver. She'll be sharing her thoughts about racism and how she has made a change in the world. Hi, Xhalida. How are you today?
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for the invitation. It's really awesome to share space with you today. And yeah, I'm excited.
Yeah, we're really glad you could be here. Okay, so I'm just going to start off with some questions. And the first one is, what was your experience like growing up as a Black Filipino and living in a white dominant community?
My experience as African and Asian growing up, I would say I grew up in Burnaby. So I feel that systematically, of course, it's going to be catered to the white population, but I did grow up in a pretty multicultural school. So I wouldn't say it was white centered, but the experiences that I faced when I was younger was a lot of microaggressions. And I feel that especially as you're learning and growing up as a student and as a kid, it can be really difficult to navigate those because you don't recognize the microaggressions when you're so young. You don't know what that is. You don't know that it's wrong. And you kind of just normalize microaggressions. So I'd say for the most part, that was my experiences. And if I did experience racism, I would be taken more as a shock to me. And I didn't really know how to deal with it properly, nor did I feel supported in schools. I did get a lot of support, of course, from my family, and my father's work has been dedicated to anti-racism work. So I was very lucky to have him as a support, but as for schools and that experiences there, not much.
Yeah, I think a lot of us can relate to like the microaggressions because we are living in a rather like culturally diverse community, and it's great that you had such an amazing role model growing up.
Yeah, really lucky.
Yeah, and so as a singer and songwriter, have you created any music like specifically about your culture?
I have, yes. My first single that I released a couple months ago is called Beautiful Life, and I did write it. It's for my people, or for the community, and it's about reminding everyone that unity is the most important. Times are getting really hard. It's really dark. That we are community driven. We're made of our community and our people. So we have to constantly remind ourselves to stay together and to unify, because that's the most important thing.
Right. I think that's so relevant right now too.
Yeah, it's on Spotify, it's on everywhere, wherever you need to get that.
Yeah, go stream Xhalida's music, everybody. And the next question is, how important is it for you as a Black artist that you get to share your creativity with the world?
It's really important to me, and when we're talking about culture, so Black culture, it doesn't matter what you do. I guess it's considered Black music, and celebrating your culture is really important, and using your voice and voicing your opinions because they're important. It's very important for expression. It's very important for all aspects of art, politics, any sort of expression. So yeah.
Okay, great. So you gave a speech at Cancel Canada Day, which is, for those who don't know, was a day to acknowledge how Indigenous people had been mistreated by the government of Canada and how this is not a day to celebrate a country that has done everything to eliminate Indigenous culture, traditions, and people. So why do you think Indigenous people are still being discriminated against?
Well, this country was built on genocide, and was built by completely trying to eliminate them as a people, as a culture. So, of course, the system that was brought here to do so is going to continue to treat them as such. They dehumanize these people.
Let's move on to the next question. So, why do you think North Canadians feel connected to the Holocaust but feel unmoved by genocide which happens on their own lands?
I think it's the lack of education. I think even myself within the last few years have been questioning, like, why don't we have more education on Indigenous history, like pre-colonial Indigenous history. Also, here in so-called Canada, our education on colonialism in this country is not talked about. So I think for the most part, it's just a lack of education that we have. And if you're not trying to actively seek out that education, you're pretty much living under a rock. So I think it's really good inspiration for people to educate themselves on how they got here, how their families got here, who was living here before that, and all the history that comes along with that. So, yeah.
I think it's kind of sad that schools don't talk about it. I know they talk a lot about the residential schools because that's like a huge part, the dark past of Canada. But really, like, when I look back at what I've learned, we really only learned how like Canadian government was formed and not how really like Canada. They don't really talk anything about like how like we stole the Indigenous people's land.
Yeah, it's very hidden. And that's the way colonial oppression works. They colonize a place, they act out all of these violent acts, and then they try and cover it up. And that's happened in most countries that have suffered and still are suffering colonization. I think Canada has had this kind of face on for so long that we're a friendly country. Everyone loves Canadians and everything's all good up here, when the violence and the genocide and all of the violence against our Indigenous people, it's just as bad as in the States as well. But it's just not as talked about here. We're not having that anymore.
Like Rachel said, more staff, more Indigenous related studies are implemented to our studies and our schools, but they're still really lacking a lot of information. So that I really found that very upsetting. I feel like schools should implement more detailed Indigenous studies, not only focusing on the residential schools. So
that's also, it's of course it's very important history to know, but that's also a way to control a narrative as well. That's for example, the narrative in our schools is very important because we can't focus on the trauma of different demographics of people. So the same thing with African diaspora coming to Turtle Island. We can't have the focus be on enslavement and slave history, and of course it's important, but the culture, the diversity of the cultures, the people, and everything that goes along with it that's pre-colonial also needs to be acknowledged and celebrated, not just the traumatizing parts of their existence.
Okay, so great. So as a part of ARC Vancouver, you've been part of the organization that created Black Shirt Day. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, we're a grassroots organization, and our members were sitting around the table, actually this table, and we were saying what events could we propose that would bring the community together? How do we raise awareness? So we were thinking of the ideas of like Orange Shirt Day to raise awareness for residential schools, and also Pink Shirt Day for anti-bullying. And then one of us said, what about Black Shirt Day? And our eyes all lit up, and I was like, that's a huge step, and I think it's a great idea. And we did our best and worked towards it. And it was pretty amazing how fast it picked up and how much support with our community it gained in such a short amount of time. And we did have the petition as well to get it mandated in schools for next year. And within the span of 2 weeks, it reached 3 provinces.
Wow.
So I can't imagine what it would have been like if we had a couple months. It probably would have went across the country. So yeah, it was really nice to see the support, and our goal was to have it to raise awareness and for us to take the space that we deserve to have these conversations in schools. And Black Shirt Day was a hit, of course. But our goal was to, okay, we'll have this space now to have these conversations in schools, these difficult conversations in schools as well. But just having the event, it was just one step in the door to what our bigger goals, our future goals is to have, the Black history in Canadian schools, to continue to have more education on how to be anti-racist. So yeah, I'm really proud of my organization for all our hard work, and I'm really, really proud of all the support that we got so far. And we're in the process of, we've had meetings with the ministry as well to mandate this as an annual event. So we're excited to keep moving forward.
I know a lot of schools, including mine, participated, and also we also had a bunch of Black t-shirts around the school. So for people who didn't know, they were they'll know for next year at least. So hopefully the upcoming years, it'll become a huge, all the schools will participate across the country, and hopefully around the world as well.
Yeah, and we saw how far it got, how many schools it reached, and I believe that was 2 weeks. We started to promote it 2 weeks before. So if we have a few months, it should go across the country, no problem.
Yeah,
and that just goes to show how powerful our social media is for news.
Because so many young kids use it these days, and I know teachers as well, they have some, because sometimes they just do and they see it and they'll probably mention it to our school. I think that's what happens, since we have a school safe specialist who has Instagram, and he probably saw your guys' post on it, and then he realized. And since our school district has an anti-racism sort of group thing, they brought it to our school as well.
Yeah, there's I'm really happy to see a lot of these organizations coming up. So these anti-racism organizations, these anti-racism committees at schools, super important to have that kind of support in schools.
Yeah,
I didn't feel like I had that growing up, nor does my sister, and nor do a lot of people that I talk to. It was always something that, especially with the microaggressions, we don't really know how to navigate it, and there's so much room for gaslighting as well. So as a teen, as a child, it's so hard to navigate how to communicate that in a way that you're going to be supported. So I'm really, really proud and really happy to see all the youth that are taking the steps forward to come together and do this hard work. It's really good.
So why do you think that Black history hasn't been taught in schools yet?
I think it's the same sort of mindset where there has to be an erasure of the violence that's perpetuated towards African diaspora to the Black community. I feel like it hasn't been taught in schools because it's not a priority in their minds. It's not a priority because we're thought of as inferior. So
yeah, I feel like we should learn more about Black history rather than like I say beavers, since that's like really all we learn about. And I mean, it's important to learn about that too, but I think Black history is more like we should use that time to learn something like more relevant.
Are you talking about the beaver pelt trade?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I understand what you mean, but of course it's still really important because that is a part of like Canadian colonial history and trades. I think that's still very important because it ties into like the Indigenous history as well. But I do agree that there needs to be more Black history. There needs to be more Indigenous history. And it needs to be taught by Indigenous people. That's a huge, huge thing. Because, you know, that narrative, I don't think can be expressed. It's not going to be expressed and taught in the best way by someone who doesn't know or someone who doesn't have that line of history and trauma in their families. It needs to be the correct information, and it needs to be from Indigenous people, and Black history needs to be taught by Black Canadians or Black people that are in Turtle Island.
And so like, I agree, like the beaver pelt trade, it's really important to learn in schools, but for some reason, like an entire day, we just learn about beavers for some reason. And I feel like
we do need some work. We need a lot of work with our school curriculums. I felt the same way in high school as well. With, you know, we were learning about the Civil Wars. So lots of it was American as well, which you know, it's no education is bad, I don't think, unless it's like racist, of course. But any sort of education is okay, but it's pretty outdated. Is that the word that?
Yeah, I think that's the better word.
Yeah, because I felt kind of the same way. I felt it was pretty boring. It was like, okay, this is when the British came over, or the British and French came over to Canada, and this is what happened. This is the wars, and you're like, okay, well, when you teach kids that's where the knowledge starts. You know, so we didn't really have space to question like, okay, what happened before then. And Asian Canadian history, I know we briefly touched on that, but not enough, and that's super important as well. I think a lot of different cultures and ethnicities and diaspora that come from all over the place, I feel like their history needs to be touched on. It's really important to understand, like, it helps you understand the place that you're living and who you're living with and how we all came to be here. You know, then you'll have a better understanding of the cultures, of the traumas that people have gone through, and it will build spaces for more compassion for each other. And more respect, to know where everyone's coming from. And also, culture is very beautiful. It's a very beautiful thing. I love learning about cultures, different traditions. So I think that should be celebrated. And you celebrate by learning more of other people's cultures.
Yeah, I think it's upsetting. Like, as you said, like, there's not a lot of like Asian Canadian topics around in school, because like for like the mandatory social studies courses, I remember only spending like maybe like a couple minutes on that topic, and we moved on to like something completely different, and just never went back to it. Like, we mostly focused on, I say, Canadian government, then World War I, then World War II, and then
that's erasure. Like, that's erasure of history. That's really important to know. And it needs to change. That definitely needs to change. We need to know the truth about how this country came to be. And, people, of course they do believe it, but you'd be surprised, like some people don't even want to hear it.
Yeah.
And that's because it makes people feel uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a whole other topic of fragility.
Yeah. So recently there's been a lot of Asian hate going around the world. Would you like to send a message to all the Asians out there who are facing a lot of racism?
My message that I would want to send, I think the message of unity is what I need to say. It's important to, I feel like the word intersectionality is used in more of like a negative way. And of course, I can understand why it could be taken as a negative term. But I think it's a good opportunity to recognize, okay, we are different and we do face different experiences with racism, but in the end, it's racism, and we need to come together with that. We need to, keep reaching out and make relations with other cultures and ethnicities, and educate your people, educate everyone, as many people as you can, and seek out education and want to learn about other people's cultures again. So that's a way to create relationships and understand how better that you can support each other, because I feel like a lot of different ethnicities of people are saying, okay, this is our issue. And of course you need to focus on that, but you also need to make relations while you're doing that as well. You can't just like shut other cultures out. And I feel like a lot of the time there's this idea that you need to like one up each other. Oh, we go through this and it's worse. And it's like, okay, well, you are validated and of course have the right to take up the space that you need, but you also need to create and give space to those as well. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And hold space. Holding space is a big thing with each other to better understand.
So finally, is there anything else you would like to say to the people who will be watching this?
I would like to say that we do, of course, have so much work to do. I'm really, really proud of my organization. This is a grassroots organization as well. We started last June, and we've done a lot of work since then, and we have a lot more work to do. And we would love for anyone listening to get involved, to reach out to us. You can check out our website, it's antiracismcoalition.org, and you can find ways to get involved. And there's more education on our page as well. You get to know who we are, how we were founded, what kind of events we have coming up. Just continue to educate yourselves on how to be anti-racist. That's super important.
We will have all of that linked, like website, Instagram, everything.
Right now, with all of what's happening on the world, because more of it's not like it's gotten, I wouldn't say better or worse. It's just that we are all able to see it now. There's so much more news, that we can see, and unity is the biggest thing right now. We need to think about the bigger population and how we can move forward, and heal our generations, and make our give space to our youth who are doing such good work right now. And there's a lot of rewiring to do, and unity and giving each other compassion and space, standing up for what's right when things are hard. And it takes a lot of courage, a lot of bravery to face such uneducated and hateful ways of being. It takes a lot of bravery and courage to face that, but that what you're doing is right. So I really, really give kudos to you guys and all the other organizations out there that are doing this good work, and just move forward, continue. We have a lot of work.
I think like a lot of youth, not only like they've formed organizations about like racism, but like other like ongoing issues such as like climate change and like how to help other youth become leaders. I think it's like great that a lot of like young people are like stepping up and becoming leaders that way. Yeah. So thank you so much for coming onto the podcast. We've had such a great time just talking to you about ongoing discrimination around the world, how important it is to acknowledge Indigenous people, Black Shirt Day, and so much more.
Thank you so much for having me. It was really awesome getting to know you, and would love to have you a part of our ARC general meetings, just to touch base and you know, to continue our relations as people who are fighting racism.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you to everyone who has tuned into the end. Like Rachel said, we have had such a great time doing this podcast and spreading awareness among youth about racism.
As always, let's keep the conversation going.